Welcome to Lesson 11, Interpreting Expository Text, the thesis statement construction piece of the expository text interpretation. Let's first review expository text. An expository text informs, explains, or describes a process or research. It's basically there to explain something, or to tell you how to do something, or to give you instructions. When writing an interpretation for an expository text, be sure to outline the basic elements of the process. Interpreting expository text. A science research paper would be an example, or baking instructions for baking a cake. Anything like that would be expository. What you want to do is outline the basic elements of the paper, right, of whatever the expository text is when you're interpreting it. Then you want to evaluate their effectiveness. This is how you are going to give your interpretation. Once you outline the basic elements of the research paper or the recipe, you can then evaluate their effectiveness. Did you learn what you were supposed to learn from the research paper? Are you now able to bake a cake following those directions? It's a very cut and dry evaluation. You don't want to try to cover all of the elements because that would be too much. You wouldn't really get to put your personal interpretation on all different aspects of that work. Some aspects you could choose from are the topic of the story, major characters in the story, major events, the setting, structure, point of view, use of language, or tone. Any of these would work. Pick one and focus on that. What you're going to do is then explain it. An interpretation should both describe the text and elaborate upon the text. Say we were to choose major characters. You will want to describe what's in the text and elaborate upon that. I've put that into a few steps here. To describe the text, introduce the major characters. In your interpretation, you then describe the major characters. What do they look like? What are their attitudes? How does the author describe them in the text? Then you explain how the author portrays them. Are they liked by other characters? Are they meant to be a villain or hero? Are they just an everyday Joe? How does the author portray these characters? Then discuss what the author's purpose was. Why did the author portray them that way? Why did the author want to get across? What did the author want to get across to readers? Because this is an interpretation, there are going to be several different answers. There's no one or right answer in interpretation because no one's going to know exactly what the author was thinking, right, when they were writing the piece of text. You're giving your interpretation of what you think the author meant. You'll describe everything the author put in the book about the characters, and then you'll elaborate upon what the author put in there by telling what you think the author was trying to tell, what the author's theme was, what their purpose was for showing characters in a certain light. When you are interpreting a text that's expository, you want to remember to just outline the basic elements and evaluate their effectiveness. You are not interpreting the entire text and all of its elements. You're just picking one and focusing on that one. Think about back to the instructions for baking the cake. After reading that expository text, you can ask yourself, were you able to bake that cake? Did you learn what you were supposed to from the research paper? With literary works, you want to focus on one aspect out of all the different things you could focus on in a literal text. Pick one, just one, and then describe that one from the text, what the author actually said, and elaborate on it. Go through and give your opinion on it, what you think the author meant. However, remember, this is not just an opinion based on your own experiences and your own background. And so we're going to get into that a little bit later, what exactly you're giving an opinion on, not just, oh, I liked it, oh, I didn't like it. But the opinion, although it is an opinion, it's going to be based on specific things. With an interpretation, everyone's going to be a little different. Not everyone's going to pick the same aspect to focus on, and not everyone's going to elaborate upon it the same way, unless the assignment is specific and the teacher tells everyone to elaborate or focus on the same thing. That's the only time that everyone would interpret the same thing, if that's the assignment. Since the author knew he was writing lots of different readers, whenever he or she created the work, try to make your interpretation unique. So when you are interpreting a text, what does it mean to interpret a text critically? It means to be a discerning reader who questions what you read, thinks about what the author wants you to believe, and works to convince you, as well as decides whether the author's views are worthy of agreement. It also means asking questions about what you read, which requires your careful examination of the writer's claims, as well as the use and quality of the writer's supporting evidence. As you interpret the text, you inevitably draw upon your own experience as well as your knowledge of other texts. However, the basis of your analysis must be rooted in the text itself. So it's going to be more of the text, less of yourself. Learning how to examine text critically is an essential skill, especially in college. You will need to use the knowledge you acquire from text for your own projects. In order to do that, you must interpret or analyze them. Things to consider when you're interpreting text and analyzing them. The first thing is the authority of the writer, using both the information you have about the writer as a person, right? Their training, their political affiliation, their life experiences, their background, their job, their education, all of those things, as well as clues from the language, tone, and approach of the text. Decide whether the writer is credible. Is the writer knowledgeable? What biases or values may be playing a role in his or her argument? Some things to consider when examining the authority of the writer are the information about the writer. What does the language, tone, and approach of the text tell you about the writer? Is the writer knowledgeable? Why or why not? What biases or values appear to have a role in the writer's argument? Okay. Another thing to consider when you're interpreting text or analyzing them is the logic of the writer's argument. It is important to ask yourself what the writer wants you to believe and whether the reasons and supporting evidence convince you of this viewpoint. Examine the credibility of the facts as well as the line of reasoning that ties the facts to the main assertion. In order to do this, you might make a T-chart like this. On one side, you might write down the things that the writer wants you to believe. On the other side, you might write down what reasons or supporting evidence the writer provides, and if they seem credible, leading to you then believing those things. The third thing that you want to consider when interpreting texts and analyzing them is how the writer gets your interest. A writer may use one or more of the following strategies to get the reader intellectually and emotionally involved in the text. Trying to get the reader to identify with the author or evoke respect for the authority of the author, for example, through tone. Trying to get the reader to care about a subject, cause, or problem, perhaps by appealing to his or her emotions, by using shocking statistics, anecdotes, or detailed descriptions. Trying to get the reader to align him or herself with a greater class of readers, right, the educated woman or environmentalist, or using the assumed interests and values of the reader as a foundation for another argument. So these are ways that the writer might try to get your interest, and things that you can use when interpreting or analyzing text. Additional things in conjunction to, right, how you identify with the author, him or herself, right? Do you have something in common with the author that causes you to identify with him or her? How does the writer evoke respect? These are all things that you can cite examples of as you are evaluating and interpreting the text. Also, does the writer get you to care about the subject, cause, or problem? How? Does the writer appeal to your emotion? Does the writer use statistics and other facts? Does the writer use anecdotes, detailed descriptions, or something else? These are all things where you want to include examples of. Does the writer seem to assume you have particular interests and or values and use them as a basis for argument? If so, how? And these are, again, examples that you can cite in your interpretation. So for the purpose of lesson 11, it's just focused on the thesis statement of an interpretation, not necessarily the interpretation piece itself, just the beginning part. So again, remember, the most important thing is that when you're writing an interpretation, you're not focusing on every element of the text. You are just zeroing in on one element and you're focusing on that element. So here, as a model, you have a text. So for example, the text that I chose is "Watch out, cell phones can be addictive." This is an article that talks about how too much dependence on a smartphone isn't smart. And you'll notice in gray it says that Dr. James Roberts, a marketing professor and author of a study about cell phone addiction that appeared in the August 2014 Journal of Behavioral Addictions, is the author of this. And so I'm, for the purpose of writing my thesis statement of my interpretation text, going to focus specifically on the author, authority, and credibility. So in order to write an interpretation of the article, I need to consider, right, three things: their authority, the logic of their argument, or how they got my attention. For the purpose of this, my interpretation, I'm going to focus on their authority. So an interpretation of the article may begin with the following thesis. The article, Watch Out, Cell Phones Can Be Addictive, offers a trustworthy viewpoint because it includes research conducted by Dr. James Roberts, who is a marketing professor and author of a study about cell phone addiction that appeared in the August 2014 Journal of Behavioral Addictions. So I'm zeroing specifically on the authority of the author in my interpretation. Now, for the exit ticket or you do portion of the lesson, there's an article that you'll read, The Power of the Like, and you are going to draft your thesis statement for an interpretation of this text. You can base your thesis statement on one of the three things to consider: authority of the writer, logic of the writer's argument, or how the writer gets the reader's attention. So you have some options. And remember to revert back to the earlier slides where it lists the different things to consider when you are considering each of those three areas, as far as authority of writer, logic of writer's argument, or how the writer gets your attention as a reader. So again, the exit ticket is to draft your thesis statement for an interpretation of the expository text titled The Power of the Like, based on one of the three foci here. And that's your exit ticket for lesson 11.